Girls like you are a stain on a nice photo. My father said it the way he said everything he'd already decided. Gently, almost kindly. The smile he saved for people he was about to be rid of. He was holding my house key while he said it. My key. He turned it over in his fingers like a coin he'd already spent, and then he slid it into the pocket of the good slacks he'd bought for the rehearsal dinner. Behind him, through the screen door, I could hear my sister's bridesmaids arguing about a seating chart, and the whole house smelled like the lilies somebody had trucked in by the crate for a wedding. I was, as of about 90 seconds ago, no longer invited to. I was 17 years old. On the top porch step, between his shoes and mine, sat a black kitchen trash bag with my entire life knotted up inside it. Two pairs of jeans, my library paperbacks, a hoodie, and though he didn't know it, the college acceptance letter I hadn't told a single person in that house about yet. He had packed the bag himself. That was the part that reached in and took the air out of me. Not the words, not the key, the folding. He had folded my shirts before he threw them out. He had taken the time. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I bent down and picked up the bag, and I felt the thin plastic handle stretch and go white against my palm, and I made myself read the brass numbers screwed over the door. 614, so that no matter how far I got, or how long it took, I would always know exactly which house had looked at me and decided I wasn't in the picture. I walked 6 blocks before my knees started shaking. I sat down on the curb outside a closed dry cleaner, and I held that bag against my chest, like it could keep me warm, and I stayed there until the streetlights came on. 13 years passed. I want to tell you they passed fast. They didn't. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday in July, a woman from a title company called me at my desk, read those same 3 numbers off a form, 614, and asked me very politely if I was the owner of record. I told her she had the wrong Winnie. She did not have the wrong Winnie. That evening, my mother came through the door of my apartment without knocking, the color gone out of her face. One hand gripping the door frame, like the floor underneath her had started to tilt. In 13 years, she had never once climbed my stairs. She didn't say hello. She didn't say my name. The first words out of my mother's mouth were, "Who told you?" My name is Winnie. I was 30 years old. The afternoon a stranger informed me that I owned the house I'd been carried out of in a garbage bag. If you've ever been the one quietly left out of your own family's photographs, scooted to the edge, then out of the frame, then out the door, then I think you already know the particular sound a mother's voice makes when she's afraid of the wrong thing. Stay with me. Before this is over, you're going to find out who was really holding that family together, and it is not who any of them thought. So do one thing for me. Stay, and go ahead and hit subscribe so you're still here when this turns. That's all I'll ask for now. Let me back up because "who told you" is the wrong question, and by the time you understand why, you'll understand everything. I built a small life. I want you to see it, because they never did. By 30, I was a paralegal at a firm that did probate and real estate in a strip mall office with a broken window unit and a coffee maker older than me. I was good at it. I spent my days reading other people's deeds and wills and settlement statements, untangling who owned what and who was owed what after somebody died or split up or simply couldn't pay anymore. There's a joke in that. I spent 10 years putting families' paperwork in order, and never once thought to pull my own. I rented the top half of a converted house with a landlord named Mr. Adler, who fixed my faucet for the price of company and left tomatoes on my step in August. I had 2 plants I hadn't killed, a library card I actually used, and a savings account I'd built one hard dollar at a time from the curb outside that dry cleaner up to something that finally, that spring, had a comma in it. I had made peace with the shape of my life the way you make peace with a scar. You stop touching it every day, and then one day, you notice you've gone a whole week without. I had not spoken to my parents in 13 years. Not a call, not a card. My sister Colleen sent a Christmas photo every December. Her, her husband, two kids on a porch that wasn't the old one. And I looked at every single one to see if I was anywhere in it, and I never was. And I told myself that was fine. So when the phone rang that Tuesday, and a woman said, "Am I speaking with Winnie Trent?" in the flat, careful voice of someone reading from a script, I assumed it was a debt for the wrong person or a jury summons. "I'm calling about the property at 614 Ridgeline," she said. "We're clearing title for a pending sale, and our search shows you as the sole owner of record. We need to verify a few things before we can move to closing." I have handled that exact phone call from the other side 100 times. I know the words. I know what sole owner of record means the way you know your own middle name. And I sat there at my desk with a client's file open in front of me, and could not make the sentence mean anything. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't own any property. I've never owned any property." A pause. Paper shuffling. "The deed was recorded in April of 2013, she said. "Grantor is a Ruth Harlow. It transfers the full interest to you. There's also an outstanding lien we need to sort out. A home equity line from 2018, before the sellers can close. Ruth Harlow? My grandmother. My Nana, who had been dead 13 years. Who had died, in fact, that same spring of 2013, in June, 6 weeks before my father folded my shirts into a garbage bag. I don't remember standing up. I remember that the client file slid off my lap and fanned across the floor, and I left it there. I remember the window unit rattling. I remember thinking, very clearly, the way you think one calm thing in the middle of a car accident. The sellers. Somebody is trying to sell 614 Ridgeline, and they can't, because it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to me. It has belonged to me since I was 17 years old. "Who are the sellers?" I asked. I already knew. I asked anyway because I needed to hear a stranger say it. She told me the names, my father's, my mother's. "Here is what I need you to sit with, the same way I had to. For 13 years I had carried the number 614 like a stone in my shoe, the house that threw me out. And for all 13 of those years, the house had been mine. They had been living in my house, sleeping in my rooms, hanging that sister's wedding photo in my hallway. And at some point in there, a bank had handed somebody a great deal of money against a house that was mine, and I had signed nothing because nobody had ever told me I had anything to sign. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest with you about that, because a lot of this story is going to make you want to cheer. And I need you to understand, I wasn't cheering. I felt the floor tilt, the same tilt my mother would be gripping a door frame against 2 hours later. Because a deed doesn't get recorded by accident. My grandmother had done this on purpose, quietly, months before she died. And nobody had ever said one word to me about it, which meant somebody had spent 13 years making very sure I never found out. "I'll need to review the file before I verify anything," I told the woman, and my voice came out level, professional, the voice I use on the worst days at work. "Send me everything. The deed, the lien, the title commitment. All of it, today." She said she would. She thanked me. She had no idea she just handed a lit match to a person standing in gasoline she didn't know was there. I hung up. I picked the client file up off the floor, squared the pages, and set it on my desk. My hands were steady. I want you to notice that, because it matters later. My hands were perfectly steady. Then I drove to the house that was mine to see who had the nerve to be selling it. 614 Ridgeline looked smaller than the house in my head. They always do. The maple I'd fallen out of at 9 had been cut to a stump. The shutters were a different color, and planted in the front lawn, angled toward the street, so the whole neighborhood could read it, was a real estate sign, with a rider hanging off the bottom on 2 little hooks. Sale pending. Pending. Somebody had shaken hands. Somebody had a closing date circled on a calendar, and none of them knew the closing was already dead, because it had been dead since April of 2013, and just hadn't found out yet. I parked across the street and sat there long enough to watch a sprinkler come on. Then I did the thing I'd told myself in the car I would not do. I got out, and I walked up the path to the front door of my own house. My hand went to my hip before I'd finished the thought. That old reach, the one your body remembers, for a key that had lived in my pocket every day of my childhood. There was nothing there. There hadn't been anything there for 13 years. I climbed the 3 porch steps anyway, and I stood on the exact board where the trash bag had sat, and I tried the door. Locked. New hardware, brushed nickel, a brand I'd have to special order for a client. Screwed into the frame beside it was a gray lockbox, the kind a realtor hangs so strangers can let themselves in to imagine their lives in your rooms. Strangers could open this door. I could not. I want you to hold those 2 facts next to each other, because I stood on that porch and held them until they cut. The law said the house was mine. The lock said I didn't belong to it. And I understood, standing there, that this was not new. This was the oldest arrangement in my family, made physical in brushed nickel. Mine on paper, locked out in every way that touches skin. I need to tell you about the key. When I was small, 5, maybe 6, my grandmother lived in the back half of that house, in the 2 rooms my grandfather built onto it before he died. Nana had her own door, her own kettle, her own smell of cold cream and pencil shavings. And one afternoon she took my hand, turned it palm up, and pressed a key into it. Her spare, threaded onto a length of red grosgrain ribbon so it wouldn't get lost. You keep that on you, she said. A door in this family will always open for you, Winnie, no matter what anybody in the front of this house decides. You remember that. I wore that key every day for 11 years. It was the key my father took out of my pocket on the porch and turned over in his fingers like a coin. It wasn't just my house key he pocketed that afternoon. It was hers. It was the promise on the ribbon. I stood on the porch of a house I owned and could not enter, and I did not cry. I want you to know I still didn't cry. But I put my hand flat against that new locked door for 1 second, the way you'd put your hand on the chest of someone who's stopped breathing. And then I turned around and went home to read the paperwork, because the paperwork was the one place in my life I had never once been locked out of. The packet that woman emailed me that evening changed everything I thought this story was about. It came in that evening, a PDF the size of a phone book. I made tea I didn't drink, and I read it the way I read files for the firm, with a legal pad, in order, refusing to skip ahead. And when you read these things in order, they tell you a story, whether the people in them wanted a story told or not. Page 1, the deed. Recorded April 9th, 2013. Grantor, Ruth Adeline Harlow. Grantee, Winnie Trent. A gift deed for love and affection and other good and valuable consideration. Transferring the entire interest in 614 Ridgeline to me. Then a minor, with my mother named as custodian on my behalf until I turned 18. Signed by Nana, in a hand that had gotten shaky by 2013, but was still unmistakably hers. Witnessed. Notarized. Recorded at the county in black and white, where it had sat, public and patient, for 13 years, waiting for exactly one person to think to look. She'd done it in April. She died in June. She had put the house in my name 10 weeks before her heart stopped, and she had made my mother the custodian of it, which meant my mother had known. My mother had signed an acknowledgement as custodian. It was 3 pages later, with her signature on it. My mother had known since I was 17 that the house was mine, and had stood in a doorway 13 years later and asked me who told me. I sat with that for a while. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Then I kept reading, because there was more. And the more is where it stopped being sad and started being a crime. Page 30-something. The lien. A home equity line of credit taken out against 614 Ridgeline in the fall of 2018. $180,000. And the borrower, the person who had pledged my house as collateral and promised a bank she'd pay it back. The name printed under the signature line, and again in the notary block, was me, Winnie Trent. My name, on a loan I had never heard of, for a house I hadn't known I owned, in a year when I was living in a studio apartment across the state and eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. I set the legal pad down. I found the signature page, and I put my thumb over the printed name, and I looked at the signature above it, the loops and the slant of a hand signing Winnie Trent. And here is the thing about being a paralegal. I have watched people sign their names 10,000 times. I know what a real signature looks like. The confidence of a hand, writing something it has written its whole life. And I know what it looks like when somebody is drawing a name instead of signing it. Careful, even, a little too slow in the turns. Somebody had practiced my signature. Somebody had sat at a table with a pen and practiced being me, and then walked into a title company in 2018 and put my house up as collateral for $180,000. And a notary had stamped it, and a bank had wired the money, and none of it had ever, for 1 second, been me. I did not feel the floor tilt this time. That's the truth. The tilting stopped right there, and something colder and much more level took its place. I opened a fresh page on the legal pad, and at the top I wrote 3 words, the way I'd write them on any file that had just gone from a probate matter to something the state's attorney needed to see. Who signed this? That was the question. Not who told you. Mine. Who signed this? I was still looking at the fake me on the screen when I heard footsteps on my stairs. Fast, uneven, 2 at a time, and a fist hit my door hard enough to rattle the frame. And I knew before I opened it, the way you know the weather from the light, that the answer to my question had just climbed a flight of stairs she'd never climbed before, to stand in front of me and ask me the wrong one. She looked older than the math said she should. That was my first thought when I opened the door. Not anger, just arithmetic. 13 years had happened to her, too. Her hair was white at the part. Her hand was still on the door frame, and it was shaking. A fine tremor she couldn't stop. The same tremor Nana's hand had by the end. Who told you? She said again, before she was all the way through the door. Was it a lawyer? Did somebody call you? Notice what she didn't ask. She didn't ask if I was all right. She didn't ask how I'd been for 13 years. She didn't look around the apartment she'd never seen. She stood in the middle of my small, clean living room and looked at me like I was a leak she had to find before it reached the ceiling. Come in, I said, though she already was. Sit down. I'm not staying. She didn't sit. Winnie, whatever you think you found, you don't understand the whole picture. Your grandmother wasn't well those last months. She'd sign anything you put in front of her. That deed doesn't mean what you think it means. It was recorded April 9th, I said. She died June 21st. That's 10 weeks. Was she not well in April, or did she stop being well the week she left the house to me? Her mouth opened and closed. You were always going to get it, she tried, softer now, reaching for the other script. That was the plan. We were holding it for you. You were 17. What were we supposed to do? Hand a teenager a house? We were going to sign it over when you grew up and settled down and could handle it. You made yourself custodian, I said. You signed the acknowledgement. So for 13 years, you knew the house was mine, and you were holding it for me. And the way you held it for me was to change the locks and put a garbage bag on the porch. You left, she said, and there it was. The oldest lie in the house, the one they'd all agreed to tell. You walked out on this family, and you never looked back, and now you come crawling out of the woodwork the minute there's money. Dad packed the bag, Mom. He folded my shirts. She stopped. Something crossed her face. I'd like to tell you it was shame, but I've learned not to name what I can't prove. She looked away, at my window, at nothing. I could have gone at her about the exile. I could have made her stand there and account for a 17-year-old on a curb. But I do this for a living, And I know that when someone comes to your door afraid, you don't waste the fear on the old wound. You spend it on the new one. So I stayed very level, and I asked the only question that mattered. Tell me about the loan. Her head came up like I'd pulled a string. What loan? Too fast. If you've ever watched somebody's face when you name the thing they came to keep buried, that flat half second before the features rearrange, you'll know exactly what I saw. She'd walked up my stairs, terrified of a deed. But the deed was the small fear. The deed was a thing you could argue about with lawyers and feelings. The loan was the thing with a stamp on it, and a prison sentence attached. And I had just said the word out loud in my living room, and my mother's whole body flinched around it. The home equity line, I said. $180,000, 2018, against my house, signed by me. I let that sit. I was in Millbrook in 2018, Mom. I've never set foot in that title company. So who sat down and practiced my signature until it was good enough to fool a notary? You don't know what you're talking about. But she'd gone gray again, grayer than the stairs had made her. You don't know what your father was facing that year. You don't know what it costs to keep a family from going under. Colleen was buying her house. The business was... She caught herself, with an almost physical effort, teeth to the sentence, and cut it in half. This is exactly why nobody could ever tell you anything. You take one piece of paper, and you make it into a weapon. Somebody committed a felony with my name, I said. I didn't make it a weapon. Somebody handed it to me loaded. She went to the door. Her hand was shaking worse now. And at the threshold, she turned around and said the thing that told me more than anything she'd said all night. Because people, when they're frightened, will always tell you where the body is buried, by telling you where you're not allowed to dig. Don't you do anything, she said. Don't you call anybody. Don't you dare go dragging your grandmother's lawyer into the middle of this and blow up this whole family over money that's already spent. Do you hear me? Leave it alone, Winnie. For once in your life, leave it alone. Her grandmother's lawyer. I hadn't known there was one. I mean, someone had drafted that deed, and the recording stamp had a firm's name on it. And I'd already planned to run it down the way I'd run down any file. But my mother didn't know I knew that. My mother had just told me, out of pure fear, that there was a specific man, connected to my grandmother, that she was more afraid of than she was of me. She'd drawn me a map to him and called it a warning. I hear you, I said. She left. I listened to her go down the stairs slower than she'd come up them, one hand on the rail. I stood at my window and watched her get into a car I didn't recognize and sit in it for a long time before she pulled away. And here is where it caught up with me. Not in the doorway, not over the loan. After, alone. I sat down on my own floor with my back against the couch, and the thing that finally took my legs out from under me was not the fraud, and not the exile, and not 13 years of Christmas photos I wasn't in. It was April 9th, somewhere in the spring of 2013, while everyone in the front of that house was already deciding I was the stain on a nice photo. My grandmother, a woman with a shaking hand and 10 weeks to live, had gotten herself to a lawyer's office, and quietly, deliberately, without telling a soul, made sure that the one thing they could never take from me would be waiting when I finally learned to look. She had chosen me. On purpose. In writing. And then she had died, and the people who folded my shirts into a garbage bag had spent 13 years and a forged signature making certain I never found out I'd been chosen at all. I put my face in my hands on my own floor, in my own quiet apartment, and for the first time since I was 17 years old, sitting on a curb outside a dry cleaner, I let myself come apart. Not over what they'd done, over what she'd done. It is a strange and terrible thing to grieve hardest at the exact moment you learn you were loved. My phone lit up on the coffee table above me, a number I didn't have saved, but a name my body knew before my eyes did. Colleen. I let it ring out. A text came through instead, and I read it lying on the floor, holding the phone over my face. Mom says you're trying to take the house out from under us. Please, Winnie. We have kids. Don't do this to your family. Whatever you think happened, this isn't you. I read it 3 times, 13 years of silence, and the first words my sister sent me were a request that I hold still while they finished robbing me. Dressed up, of course, as a plea to protect the very family that had thrown me out. This isn't you. She didn't know the first thing about who I was. None of them did. They'd decided who I was on a porch in 2013 and never once checked their work. I got up off the floor, I washed my face, and I opened my laptop and started doing the one thing my mother had crossed a city and 13 years of estrangement to beg me not to do. I went looking for my grandmother's lawyer. The recording stamp on the deed had a name on it, the way they always do. The person who'd walked it into the county office in April of 2013. Kessler, a solo practitioner with an office above a bakery, 2 towns over, the kind of lawyer who does wills and closings for people who've known him 40 years. His website looked like it had been built in 2004 and never touched again. He was, according to the bar directory, semi-retired. He was also, according to the county, the man my grandmother had trusted with the last, clear-headed decision of her life. I called him the next morning before the firm opened. I said my name, and there was a silence on the line so long I thought the call had dropped. "Winnie Trent," he finally said, and his voice did something I wasn't prepared for. It gentled. "I have been waiting 13 years for you to call this number." I sat down. He asked me to come in. I took a personal day I couldn't really afford, and I drove 2 towns over, and I climbed a narrow staircase that smelled like bread. And an old man with liver-spotted hands and a cardigan met me at the top and looked at me like I was a ghost he'd been hoping for. "You have her chin," he said. "Sit. There are things your grandmother wanted you to have, and things she wanted you to know, and I have failed for 13 years to deliver either, and I would like to explain why before you decide what kind of man that makes me." Here is what Emmett Kessler told me, in an office full of dying plants and closed files, while a bakery hummed underneath us. My grandmother came to him in the early spring of 2013 in a hurry. Not the vague hurry of an old woman, a specific one. She had discovered something, and she wanted it fixed before she ran out of time, and she already suspected she was running out of time. What she'd discovered was this. My father, who'd been given power of attorney over her finances 2 years earlier, when her hands got bad and the paperwork got hard, had been helping himself. Not all at once. The way people do it when they think no one is ever going to check. A transfer here, a reimbursement there, a line of credit in her name she never asked for. By the spring of 2013, the accounts my grandfather had spent 40 years filling were most of the way empty, and my grandmother had finally gotten a statement she wasn't supposed to see and understood what had happened to her life savings. The money was gone. She knew she'd never get it back, and she was too tired and too near the end to fight her own son in a courtroom she wouldn't live to sit in. But the house was still hers. The house was the one thing not yet inside his reach, because the house had been my grandfather's, and it was in her name alone, and power of attorney or not. My father couldn't simply take it while she was living, so she took it out of the whole equation. She deeded it, clean, to the one person in that family she trusted not to be poisoned by the front of the house. A 17-year-old girl who spent her afternoons in the back 2 rooms drinking tea with an old woman and never once asked her for a thing. Me. She made my mother custodian only because the law required an adult on a minor's deed, and she recorded it fast in April, and she told Kessler, "Don't tell them. They'll find a way to undo it. Just make sure it holds until she's grown, and make sure she knows I did it on purpose." "She was going to tell you herself," Kessler said. "That summer, after your sister's wedding, when things quieted down. She wanted to hand it to you in person." He folded his spotted hands. "She died in June, and then in July, before I'd even settled how to reach a grieving 17-year-old about a house. I got a call from your mother. telling me you'd run off, that you'd cut the family out, that you wanted nothing to do with any of them or anything of your grandmother's, and that any further contact from me would be, in her words, harassment of a family in mourning. I sat very still. You believed her. I believed her enough to be a coward about it, he said, and he did not look away from me when he said it, which I respected more than I wanted to. I sent letters, 3 of them over 2 years, to the only address I had for you. Your parents' house, care of your mother, the custodian. They were never answered. I told myself a grown girl who wanted nothing to do with her family had the right to be left alone. I told myself that for 13 years. He reached into a drawer. I never once let myself consider that the person I was mailing your grandmother's letters to was the person who most needed you never to read them. He set an envelope on the desk between us. It was old, the paper gone soft at the corners from 13 years, in a drawer. My name was on the front, in a shaking hand. I would have known anywhere. Not Winnie Trent, just Winnie. The way she said it, I did not open it. I want to tell you why, because it matters. I have spent my whole life being handed things in the wrong rooms. Bad news at the dinner table, a garbage bag on a porch, a cruelty dressed up as a compliment. And I knew, looking at that envelope, that whatever my grandmother had written to me was the one thing in this entire story that was purely mine. And I was not going to open it in a lawyer's office 2 towns over with a bakery humming underneath me. I was going to open it in the right room, and I did not yet know which room that was. There's more, Kessler said quietly. She left a safe deposit box. In your name. She set it up the same week. I have the key and instructions I'm now finally allowed to follow because you've asked. He almost smiled. You have no idea how much I've wanted somebody to ask. I put the letter in my bag. I took the small brass safe deposit key he slid across the desk, and I drove home in a silence that had a whole new floor underneath it, because everything had just moved. I want you to understand what changed in that bakery office, because this is the hinge the whole thing turns on. Up until that morning, I thought I was a girl who'd been thrown away by a cold family, and had, through a dead woman's kindness, accidentally ended up owning the house they threw her out of. A sad story with a strange twist. Something I might even, one distant day, forgive. That is not what happened to me. What happened to me is that my grandmother caught my father robbing her blind, and she moved the one thing she had left out of his hands and into mine to keep it safe. And 10 weeks later, she was dead. And 6 weeks after that, the man she'd caught looked at the only heir who might someday inherit her suspicions. The girl who'd sat at her side every afternoon, the one witness in the house who loved the old woman more than she feared him. And he folded that girl's shirts into a garbage bag and put her out on the curb before the wedding photos and told her she was the stain. I wasn't thrown away for ruining a nice photo. I was thrown away because I was the last loose end in the back 2 rooms. The exile wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was cleanup. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, because I need a witness for what comes next, do something for me. Down in the comments, tell me one thing. At what age did your family decide who you were going to be? Mine decided at 17. It took me until 30 to file an appeal. Say your number. I read them, and I promise you're not the only one who was assigned a role in a house before you were old enough to refuse it. Then stay close, because I stopped being sad somewhere on that drive home, and I need you to watch what I did with the space the sadness used to take up. The safe deposit box was at a branch bank with marble floors, worn into soft dips by 80 years of feet. I signed the card. The clerk compared my ID to the name on the account my grandmother had opened the same April week she'd saved my life without telling me. And she took me into the little room with the long table, and she left me alone with a steel drawer. Inside was my grandmother, in the way that people leave themselves in the things they keep. Her wedding ring, in a ring box gone brittle. My grandfather's original deed to the house from 1971, the paper thick as cloth, a photograph, and I'll come back to the photograph, because I couldn't look at it long right then. A stack of bank statements banded together, with a note clipped to the top in her shaking hand. For Winnie. Proof in case they say I imagined it. I read the statements the way I read everything now, in order. They told the same story Kessler had, except in numbers, which don't grieve and don't exaggerate. 2 years of a life's savings, walking out the door in even, greedy, unhurried steps. A woman watching it happen and keeping the receipts for a granddaughter she wouldn't live to warn. And at the bottom of the box, on a length of red grosgrain ribbon, gone pale with age, was a key. Her spare. The twin of the one my father took off me on the porch. She'd kept her own all those years, and at the end she'd put it here, in a steel drawer with my name on it, where he could never fold it into anything. I sat down in the little marble room, and I held that key in my fist until the ribbon left lines in my palm, and I did the math on how long she must have planned all of it. The deed, the box, the letter, the key. While everyone in the front of the house was measuring me for the role of the family disgrace. She'd been building me a door the whole time they were building me a story. I put the ribbon around my neck, under my shirt, where my key used to ride. Then I packed the statements into my bag, because grief is grief. But the statements were evidence, and I had work to do. Now, I have to tell you about the hour I'm least proud of, because I promised you the truth, and this is part of it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with everything spread out. The deed, the forged loan, Nana's statements, the notary block, 13 years of being erased. And for about an hour, I was somebody I didn't like. I held all that power in my 2 hands, and I let myself imagine using it the way they'd have used it. I imagined the sheriff at their door. I imagined my father in a courtroom with his good slacks and his gentle voice explaining a forged signature to a judge. I imagined my mother's face when the house sold out from under her to a stranger, and she stood on the curb with her things in a bag, and I imagined making sure the bag was black plastic, and I imagined enjoying it. And here's the thing that stopped me. It wasn't mercy. I want to be honest. It wasn't that I'm a better person than my rage. It was that I could hear, underneath all of it, my father's voice on the porch. Girls like you are a stain. And I understood that if I did this the way they'd do it, with cruelty for its own sake, with the point being their pain and not my truth, then I would be, at last, exactly the thing he'd named me. I would have spent 13 years becoming his sentence about me. I was not going to hand him that. I was not going to let the last thing my grandmother did with her life become the raw material for me turning into the front of that house. So I made a different decision, and I wrote it at the top of the legal pad, and I underlined it twice. The truth. Only the truth. All the way down. I would not lie. I would not exaggerate. I would not invent a single thing. I would simply stop protecting them from what was already real, and let the true documents say, out loud in a room full of witnesses, what my family had spent 13 years and a forged name, making sure no one could say. If the truth destroyed them, that was the truth's doing, not mine. That decision, it turned out, was the strongest position I could possibly have taken. Because the truth had a stamp on it, and their story only had me agreeing to keep quiet, and I was done agreeing. I went to work, quietly, methodically, the way I do it for strangers. I pulled the 2018 Notary's Journal. Notaries are required by law to keep a log, and this one had. On the day my house was pledged for $180,000, Winnie Trent had appeared in person and shown a driver's license. I ordered my own driving record for 2018. I'd renewed my license in Millbrook that March, at a DMV 4 hours from that title company, and I had the pay stubs and the lease and a supervisor who'd swear I hadn't missed a shift. The woman who'd signed my name had either used a fake ID or a very forgiving notary. Either way, she was not me, and I could prove it 3 different ways before lunch. I took the forged signature to a document examiner our firm uses on contested wills, a real one, who charges real money and testifies in real courtrooms. I gave her 15 genuine samples of my signature and the loan page and told her nothing else, because that's how you get an opinion instead of a favor. 2 days later, she sent back 4 pages of terminology that added up to one sentence any jury would understand. The person who signed that loan was not the person who signed these samples. And then I traced the money because $180,000 doesn't evaporate. It moves, and title companies keep records of where. Most of it had gone to clear my father's debts. The business that had been the business was in my mother's mouth, the one she couldn't finish saying. But 95,000 of it had wired out in November of 2018, straight to an escrow account as a down payment on a house. Colleen's house. The porch in the Christmas photos. The one I studied every December to see if I was in it. My sister had been living, for 8 years, in a home bought with money stolen, against a house that belonged to me, forged in my name, while she texted me, "Please don't do this to your family." She wasn't a bystander. She was standing on the down payment. I sat back from the table. 3 loops, I thought. The way I think about a file. Who owns it? Proven. Who forged it? Provable. Where the money went? Traced. I had the whole thing, clean and stamped and true. What I didn't have yet was the stomach, for the part that wasn't on paper. Because a deed is a fact, and a forgery is a felony, but a sister is neither. And before I decided what to do with any of it, there was one person I needed to look in the eye. One person whose whole life was sitting, literally, on top of mine. I knew the porch before I knew the street. I'd studied it for 8 Decembers. The white railing, the flag bracket, the 2 steps my sister's kids sat on, in matching sweaters, while I searched every photo for a version of the family that had room in it for me. I'd never once been there. I'd never been invited. But I could have found that porch in the dark, because I'd spent years memorizing the exact shape of the place I wasn't. Now I stood on it. The mums and the pots were real. The welcome mat said welcome, like it meant everyone but me. Colleen opened the door with a dish towel over her shoulder and a toddler on her hip, and when she saw it was me, the color left her face the same way it had left our mother's. For a second, neither of us said anything. Somewhere behind her, a cartoon was playing, and a timer was going off in the kitchen, and her whole warm, ordinary life kept humming along around the frozen center of her. "You didn't have to come here," she said finally, quiet, moving the baby to her other hip like a shield. "We could have talked Saturday. I didn't come to fight, Colleen." I kept my hands where she could see them, my bag closed. I hadn't brought the folder. That was on purpose. I came because I wanted to see you before there were 30 people in the room. Just once. Just us. She let me in as far as the entry, no farther, which told me everything about how afraid she was. And I stood in the front hall of a house I had, in a sense, paid for. And I looked at the framed photos, climbing the stairwell. Her wedding, the babies, a beach somewhere, a whole life documented and displayed. And I did the thing I'd been doing since I was 7. I looked for myself in the pictures. I wasn't in a single one. "You have a beautiful home," I said, and I meant it, and it cut both of us. "Winnie, do you know where the down payment came from?" I didn't say it cruelly. I said it the way you'd ask someone if they knew there was a gas leak. Not the details. Just, "Do you know?" She opened her mouth, closed it, bounced the baby. "Dad handled all that. He said he said he'd come into some money. He wanted to help us get started. He said it was a gift." Her voice thinned out toward the end of the sentence, because she could hear it now, in her own front hall, the way it sounded. A gift, in 2018, out of nowhere, from a man whose business was failing. $95,000, I said. Wired out of a loan somebody took against Nana's house by forging my name. That's the gift, Colleen. That's the money. Your stairs, your kitchen timer, the porch I spent 8 Christmases staring at. The down payment was a loan against a house that was legally mine, signed by a hand pretending to be my hand. I didn't know that. Her eyes had filled. I swear to you, I didn't know your name was on anything. I didn't know about a loan. I believe you didn't know the paperwork. And I did believe her, that part. But Colleen, a man whose business was drowning, handed you $95,000 in cash in the same year I fell off the face of the earth, and you cashed it. And you never once asked where a drowning man got $95,000. You didn't know because you decided not to know. That's not the same as innocent. It's just quieter. She started to cry then, the baby patting her wet cheek with a fat hand, and I felt the old pull to take it back, to make it easier, to be the good sister who smooths it over. The exact reflex that had let this family run on silence for 40 years. I held still against it. Somebody in that bloodline had to. You want to know the part that actually hurts? I said softer. It was never the house, Colleen. I could have made peace with the house. It's that you got the porch, you got the wedding and the Christmas cards, and the 2 steps, and the welcome mat, and I got a garbage bag. And the only difference between us, the only one, is which daughter Dad decided kept the photo nice. You didn't earn the porch. I didn't earn the curb. We were just assigned. And you spent 13 years comfortable enough not to ask why your sister vanished, because asking might have cost you the mums and the pots. What do you want me to do? She whispered. Tell me what you want. And that was the saddest sentence of all, because even now, even crying in her own doorway, she thought this was a negotiation. She thought I'd come to collect. I don't want you to do anything, I said. I wanted you to look at me, that's it. 13 years, and I just wanted one person in this family to stand in front of me and actually see what got done, instead of managing me. You did. It's more than I got at 17. I stepped back onto the porch, onto the 2 steps, and the wood was solid under me. And for one strange second, I let myself feel what it would have been to belong on them. I'll see you Saturday. Are you going to blow it all up in front of everyone? She asked, frightened. Please, Winnie, the kids. I'm not going to lie to anyone, I said. That's all I can promise you. I'm done lying for this family. Even the polite kind. Even the kind that looks like kindness. If the truth blows something up, it was already full of gas. I looked at her one more time. My sister. The porch. The whole life built on my stolen roof. You should decide, before Saturday, which side of the truth you want your kids to remember you standing on. That's not a threat. It's just the only real gift anybody in this family has ever been able to give another one. And nobody ever takes it. I drove home and I did not cry. And then I sat in my car outside Mr. Adler's house for 20 minutes, and I did. Then I went upstairs and I picked up the phone and I called the title company and I told them, formally, on the record, that I was the owner of record, that I had never signed the 2018 line of credit, and that they needed to stop everything. I set the machine in motion myself. Nobody handed me that. I reached out with my own hand and I turned the key. Here's the thing they hadn't planned for. The day I told the title company that the owner of record disputed the 2018 lien and had never signed it, their tidy little sale stopped being tidy. A title company can ignore a lot of things. A forged signature flagged by the actual owner is not one of them. The closing froze. The buyers, who had a moving truck reserved and a child starting school in the fall, got a call telling them the seller couldn't deliver clear title, and they did what anyone would do. They got angry, and then they got a lawyer, and then they walked. The sale my parents needed. The one that was going to fund their soft landing in Florida and outrun a debt I was only beginning to understand, was dead. And it was dead because of a piece of paper stamped with the truth. They found out fast. The counterattack came 3 days later, on letterhead. It was a good letter, technically. Their lawyer was not a bakery lawyer. It said the 2013 deed was the product of undue influence over a woman in cognitive decline. It said my parents had maintained, insured, and improved the property openly for 13 years and were prepared to assert a claim of adverse possession. It said that if I persisted, I would bear responsibility for the emotional and financial devastation of my own family, and it invited me warmly to sign an enclosed quitclaim deed handing the house back, to put this painful misunderstanding behind us. I read it twice, and then I did something I hadn't done in the whole ordeal. I laughed. Because I do this for a living. Undue influence over a woman who drove herself to a lawyer, kept her own bank statements, and set up a safe deposit box in secret? Kessler would bury that in an afternoon. And adverse possession. You cannot adversely possess a house you're living in with the owner's permission. My grandmother let them stay. Permission is the whole opposite of the hostile possession the law requires. They'd have to prove they'd been trespassing in their own home against a granddaughter who didn't even know she held the title, which, I promise you, is not a sentence a lawyer wants to say out loud to a judge. The letter wasn't a legal position. It was a man in a suit hoping I couldn't read. I could read. My father called that evening. Not shouting. My father never shouts. That's the thing you have to understand about him. The thing that makes him so much worse than a man who shouts. He used the porch voice. Gentle. Reasonable. The voice he saves for people he's already decided about. Winnie, he said, like we'd talked last week. This has gone far enough, don't you think? Lawyers, letters. That's not who we are. As if he hadn't taught me exactly who we are in a single afternoon with a garbage bag. Your mother's beside herself. Saturday's our 40th. The whole family's coming to the house. I want you to come. Sit down with us, all of us, and let's settle this the way a family settles things. No lawyers. Just us. I understood the play immediately. Get me in the house, in front of the aunts, and the cousins, and the neighbors, where I'd be the one making a scene if I said no, and pressure me, gently, publicly, lovingly, into signing their quitclaim so the whole ugly thing could disappear before anyone looked too closely at a stamp. Turn 30 relatives into 30 reasons for me to be quiet. It had worked on me at 17. Everyone in that house had watched me carried out and said nothing, and their silence had been the loudest thing in my life for 13 years. He thought he was setting a trap. He was handing me a courtroom. I'll be there, I said. I could hear him smile. That's my girl. I was not his girl. But I let him have the sentence because I wanted him relaxed. Colleen texted an hour later, warmer than before, now that Dad had greased the road. So glad you're coming Saturday. Let's just be family again. The kids can't wait to meet their Aunt Winnie. I looked at that for a while. The kids, in the house on the down payment, meeting the aunt whose house paid for their porch. And I did not text back anything sharp. I texted, "See you Saturday." Let them all feel the ground was solid. It's easier to show people the truth when they've stopped bracing for it. I spent Friday getting ready the way I'd get ready for the most important hearing of my life. Because it was. I made a folder. Not a big theatrical binder. One plain manila folder because the truth doesn't need a costume. In it, a certified copy of the 2013 deed with the county stamp. My mother's custodian acknowledgement. Her signature right there. The 2018 loan with the forged signature. 15 genuine samples and the examiner's report. The notary log. My 2018 driving record and a pay stub from Millbrook. And Nana's bank statements, banded, with her note on top in her own shaking hand. Originals stayed locked up. Copies went in the folder. I made 3 folders, actually identical, and left 2 with people I trusted, because I read enough files to know what desperate people do to paper. I called Kessler. He offered to come Saturday to stand beside me, and it meant more than I told him. But I said no, not because I didn't want him, because this was mine to say. He'd carried my grandmother's voice for 13 years. I wasn't going to make him carry mine too. Be near your phone, I told him. If they say a word about that deed being invalid, I may put you on speaker. He said he'd keep the phone in his hand all afternoon. He said she'd be very proud of the woman on the other end of this line. I had to hang up before I could answer that one. Saturday morning, the sealed letter was still on my kitchen table. My grandmother's handwriting on the front. Winnie. I had carried it for over a week, and I still hadn't opened it. And I want you to trust me that this was not avoidance. I knew, the way you know some things, all the way down, that her letter was the last word, the thing that came after everything else was finished. And I was not going to spend it early. There was a right room for it, and it was not my kitchen, and it was not the party. I put the letter in my bag, unopened. I would know the room when I stood in it. Then I lifted the red ribbon over my head and settled the key against my chest, under my shirt, where a key used to ride when I was a girl, who thought a door in that family would always open for her. I put on the kind of clothes you can't be dismissed in. I set the manila folder on the passenger seat, and for the first time in 13 years, I drove to 614 Ridgeline as the person who owned it. There were balloons on the mailbox, 40 of them, gold and white, bunched around the post like something celebrating. Cars lined both sides of Ridgeline. Through the front window, I could see people moving, plates in hands, and a banner strung across the mantel. 40 years. Over the fireplace where my grandmother's photo used to sit. I parked. I sat for the length of one breath with my hand flat on the folder. Then I picked it up and I walked up the path, past the sale pending sign that nobody had taken down because the sale was dead, and they were all pretending it wasn't. And I climbed the 3 porch steps, and I stood for 1 second on the exact board, and I knocked on the front door of my own house like a guest. My cousin Danny opened it. He was 9 the last time I saw him. He didn't know me. "Can I help?" he said. And behind him, the noise of the party rolled out warm and buttery. And then my father appeared in the hall, with his arms already opening. "Winnie," he announced, loud enough to turn heads. "Everyone, Winnie's here." And the room did a thing I'll remember all my life. It went quiet in pieces, the way a field goes quiet when a shadow crosses it. And 30 faces turned toward the door. And I watched them all reach for the story they'd been handed 13 years ago and put it on me like a coat. The difficult one. The one who left. The one who broke her mother's heart. Aunt Pat's mouth had already gone soft with pity. Somebody murmured, "Doesn't she look well?" in the tone you'd use for a woman just out of somewhere. My father put his hand on my shoulder and steered me into the middle of the room. And this was the trap. Exactly as I'd known it would be. 30 witnesses arranged into 30 polite reasons to keep quiet. "We've had a rough patch," he told them, his voice doing that gentle, generous thing. "And Winnie and her mother and I are going to sort it out today, like family. No lawyers." A ripple of approving warmth. He'd cast himself, in one sentence, as the big-hearted father welcoming home the prodigal. And then he reached to the sideboard and picked up a single sheet of paper and a pen. And he held them out to me in front of everyone, smiling, and he said, "We thought we'd just clear the and put it all behind us. It's just a formality, sweetheart." The quitclaim. He was going to have me sign my grandmother's house away, in front of the whole family, and call it healing. I looked at the pen. I looked at all of them looking at me, kind and certain, and completely wrong. And I did not take it. "Before I sign anything," I said, and I kept my voice level, easy, a voice for a room, not a fight. "I think everyone here should see what it is you're all asking me to sign away, because I don't think most of you know." I set the manila folder on the dining table, and I opened it, and I laid down the first page where the light was good. "This is a deed," I said. Certified copy straight from the county. It's recorded April 9th, 2013. I put my finger under the names so the aunts leaning in could read them. The person giving the house away is Ruth Harlow, my grandmother, and the person she gave the entire house to, recorded, stamped, legal, 13 years ago, is me. The warmth in the room changed its mind. Winnie, my father's voice still gentle but faster now. We've been over this. Your grandmother was not well those last months. That document is being contested. This is not the time. She drove herself to the lawyer's office, I said. In April. She died in June. Was she not well enough to know her own mind in April, Dad? Or did that start being true only after she left the house to the wrong daughter? That's enough. It's really not. I laid down the second page. This is an acknowledgement, signed the same month, by the custodian, the law required on a minor's deed. The custodian is Mom. I looked at her. She was standing very still by the kitchen doorway, with a serving spoon still in her hand. Which means, Aunt Pat, that everyone who's been telling you for 13 years that I ran off and abandoned this family knew, the whole time, that this house was legally mine and that they were living in it. Somebody set a plate down too hard. Nobody was chewing anymore. Now here's the part I need you all to look at carefully, I said, because it's the part that stops being a family disagreement. And I laid down the loan. In the fall of 2018, somebody took out a home equity line against this house, $180,000. To do that, the bank needs the owner's signature. The owner is me. I set a second sheet beside it, my real signature, 15 times, on the examiner's exemplar page. This is my signature. And this, I tapped the loan, is what somebody drew when they sat at a table and practiced being me. In 2018, I was living in Millbrook, 4 hours from that title company. Here's my driver's record. Here's a pay stub. I hadn't spoken to a soul in this house in 5 years. I let it sit for one breath. So, I've had a document examiner, a real one, who testifies in real courtrooms. Compare them. Her report is right here. Her professional opinion is that the person who signed that loan is not the person who signed these samples. Somebody in this family forged my name to put my house up as collateral. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a felony. And it has been sitting on this house, in my name, for 8 years. The silence had weight now. I could hear the refrigerator hum through the kitchen doorway, the one that had hummed there my whole childhood. One of Colleen's boys had stopped by the stairs, maybe 7, watching the adults' faces with the sharp attention of a child who's realized the grown-ups are the ones in trouble. You don't know what you're doing, my mother said. Her voice had gone thin. You don't know what this family went through. You don't. Then tell them where the money went. I said it quietly, and I laid down the last pages, my grandmother's bank statements. Banded, her note on top, in the shaking hand half the room would recognize. Because I traced it. Most of that $180,000 cleared Dad's debts, but $95,000 of it wired out in November of 2018 to an escrow account as a down payment. I looked at my sister, who had gone the color of the tablecloth, her youngest on her hip. On Colleen's house, the one in the Christmas cards. Winnie, Colleen started. I'm not finished, and this is the part that isn't about money at all. I picked up Nana's statements, and I held them, so the light caught them. My grandmother didn't leave me this house because she loved me best. She left it because she found out her own son had spent 2 years quietly emptying her accounts with a power of attorney, and this house was the one thing left that he couldn't take while she was breathing. So she moved it, fast, in secret, to the one person in this family she trusted, not to hand it back to him. Me, the girl who sat with her in the back rooms every afternoon. My voice did finally catch, just once, on the next sentence, and I let it. And 10 weeks after she signed it, she died. And 6 weeks after that, before her chair was even cold, I was put out of this house with my clothes in a garbage bag, and my father told me I was a stain on a nice photo. And every single one of you watched it happen and decided I must have deserved it. Nobody said, "Doesn't she look well now?" I wasn't thrown out for ruining a wedding picture, I said. I was thrown out because I was the last person in this house who loved that old woman more than I was afraid of her son. I was the loose end, and it took me 13 years and a phone call from a title company to understand that the worst day of my life was never about me at all. It was cleanup, and the room went completely, terribly still. For a moment, nobody in that house moved. 30 people who had spent 13 years comfortable inside one story were standing in the wreckage of it, holding paper plates, and you could see them going back through their own memories, rereading them. Aunt Pat had a hand pressed flat to her chest. An uncle I half recognized had set down his beer and was looking at my father the way you look at a stranger who's just walked into your yard. My mother broke first, and she broke exactly the way she had in my doorway a week before. Not into confession, into panic. Her hands started to shake, that same fine tremor, and she came around the table, fast, and reached for the papers, for Nana's statements, trying to gather them up, to make them go away with her hands, the way she'd made me go away with a garbage bag. "This is private," she was saying, her voice climbing. "This is family. You have no right. You have no right to bring this into my house." "It was never your house, Mom." She stopped with her shaking hands, full of my grandmother's evidence. "You asked me a question not 2 weeks ago, in my apartment," I said. "You stood in my doorway before you said hello, and you asked me, 'Who told you?' I want to answer it now, in front of everybody, because it's the whole thing, really. Nobody told me. There was no lawyer, no cousin, no phone call from a friend. A stranger from a title company called me at my desk because my name was on the deed, because it has always been on the deed. And the only reason that was a surprise to me is that every person I was related to spent 13 years making sure I never found out. That's the answer, Mom. Nobody told me. You just finally couldn't stop me from looking." The serving spoon was still in her other hand. She looked down at it, like she didn't know how it got there. And my father, I had been waiting to see what my father would do, because he is the most dangerous when he's cornered, and I wanted the whole room to see it too. For a second, the gentle mask held. He spread his hands, reasonable, and he opened his mouth to reach for the warm voice, the porch voice, the one that had run this family for 40 years. But it was gone. He couldn't find it. And what came out instead, low, was the thing that had always been underneath it. "After everything we did for you," he said. And there was no gentleness in it now. None. Just the cold I'd felt on the porch at 17. "You come into my home and do this. You were always ungrateful. Even as a girl. Ruth ruined you, filling your head, and look what you've become." And that was the sound the whole room needed to hear. Not a confession. He never confessed to anything. Not the accounts, not the signature, not the bag. Men like my father don't confess. But standing in his own living room, in front of his own sisters and his grandchildren, with the truth stamped and undeniable on the table, he took one look at the daughter he'd thrown away and reached by pure reflex for the same knife. "Girls like you." And everyone in that house heard the voice he used on me finally, with their own ears. And they understood, all at once, that the story they'd been told about the difficult daughter had been told to them in exactly that voice, by exactly that man. And they had believed it because it was easier than believing what was standing in front of them now. Colleen was crying. Not the performance kind. Her husband had taken the baby from her. "I didn't know about the deed," she said, to the room to me. "I swear to God, Winnie, I didn't know your name was on it, but you knew where the money came from for your down payment," I said gently, because she was the only one I still felt anything soft toward. "Or you knew enough not to ask. That's the family disease, Colleen. Not asking. I caught it too for 13 years. I just finally asked. She couldn't answer that. There wasn't an answer. I closed the folder. I want you to know I didn't raise my voice once in that house. I didn't need to. The papers were louder than any voice I owned. Here's where this stands, I said. And I said it to all of them, evenly, like I was reading a settlement statement to a room of clients, which in a way I was. The sale is dead. It died the day I told the title company I never signed that loan, and there's no one telling it. The forgery is documented. I didn't have to make a report. The title company is required to, and they have. That's not my doing. That's the natural consequence of 8 years ago arriving on schedule. I'm not the one who set it in motion. I'm just the one who stopped covering it. I picked up my folder. The house is mine. It has been since I was 17. What happens to it now is my decision, and I'm going to make it the way my grandmother made hers. Carefully and without cruelty, and in my own time. But it will be my decision. Not yours. Never yours again. My mother sat down in a dining chair like her legs had quit. My father stood in the center of his 40th anniversary party, under the gold and white banner, and said nothing, because for the first time in his life, there was nothing he could say that the room would swallow. I looked around at all of them one last time, the aunts, the cousins, the neighbors, the whole quiet jury that had watched a 17-year-old carried out and said nothing. I didn't hate them. That surprised me. I'd expected to. But standing there, finally holding the truth in a manila folder in the middle of that room, I mostly just felt the 13-year weight of their silence lift off my chest and settle at last where it belonged. On them. I'll let myself out, I said. I know the way. But I didn't go out the front. That's the thing none of them expected, and the thing my grandmother, I think, had been counting on. I turned, and I walked down the hallway of the house that was mine. Past the wedding photos I wasn't in, past the bedroom that used to be mine, toward the back of the house, toward the 2 rooms my grandfather built, and my grandmother lived and died in, where a girl once drank tea every afternoon with the only person who ever chose her on purpose. I had a letter in my bag I hadn't opened in 13 years of not knowing it existed, and 1 week of knowing. And I finally knew which room to open it in. The back of the house was quiet in a way the front had never been. They'd been using Nana's 2 rooms for storage. Boxes stacked on the daybed, a dead treadmill, the flotsam a family lets pile up in the room where someone died. But the walls were still her pale green. The window still looked out on the maple stump. And her door, the separate door my grandfather built so his wife could come and go on her own terms, was still there at the end of the little hall, with the same brass lock it had worn for 50 years. Because why would they ever change the lock on a door nobody used? I lifted the red ribbon over my head. The key had been warm against my chest all afternoon. I fitted into that old lock, and I felt the small resistance of a mechanism that hadn't turned in years, and then it gave, the way a held breath gives, and the bolt slid back with a sound I felt in my teeth. A door in this family will always open for you, Winnie. It did. 13 years and 1 afternoon late, but it did. I stood there with my hand on the knob of a door that opened for me when the whole front of the house had been locked, and I understood that my grandmother had known in April of 2013, with a shaking hand and 10 weeks to live, that they would take my key and change my locks and put me out and rewrite me into a stranger. She'd known all of it, and she had left one door in the world that they could not reach, and put the key to it in a steel box with my name on it, and trusted me to still be the kind of person who'd come looking. I went in, and I sat down on the edge of her daybed, in the dust and the late light, and I took out her letter, and I opened it there, in the one room in that house that had always been mine. Her handwriting had gotten so bad by the end, I had to go slow. Winnie, it said, if you are reading this, then you finally looked, And I am sorry it took so long, and I am sorry I'm not there to hand it to you myself, which was the whole plan, and which my heart, it seems, is not going to cooperate with. By now you know about the house. I won't waste this page on your father. You'll have learned what he is, and I'm sorry for that too, because a girl should get to keep her family a little longer than you're going to get to keep yours. I want to tell you why I did it, and I want you to read this part twice. I did not leave you the house because it is worth money. It is a house. It has a bad furnace and a crack in the back step, and more of my life in it than I know what to do with. I left it to you because you are the only person in this family who ever sat with me for no reason. You did not want anything. You came in the afternoons, and you drank my terrible tea, and you let an old woman talk, and you have no idea, Winnie, no idea what that is worth to someone at the end who has spent her whole life being useful and is terrified of being nothing but a chore. They are going to tell you that you are difficult, that you are cold, that you are a problem. I have heard the front of this house rehearsing it for years, and I want to be the one voice in your life that says, it is a lie, and it was always a lie, and the fact that they need it to be true about you tells you everything about them and nothing about you. You are not a stain on anything. You are the best of us. You are the part of this family I would save if I could only save one part. And it turns out I can. So I am. I've left you my key. You know the one. I meant what I told you when you were small. A door in this family will always open for you, my girl, because I made sure of it. Because it was the last useful thing these hands could do. Come drink tea in my room sometime. Bring someone who's kind to you. Fill this house with people who ask how you are and mean it. You were chosen, Winnie, on purpose, in writing. Don't you ever let them tell you otherwise again. All my love, always, Nana. I don't know how long I sat in her rooms. The party sounds had gone from the front of the house. Cars leaving, doors. The particular silence of a gathering that has ended early and badly. The light went gold and then gray. I read it twice, the way she told me to, and then I read it a third time. And somewhere in the third, reading the thing I'd been holding since I was 17, finally let go. It wasn't the fraud that undid me in the end. It wasn't the deed or the loan or the balloons on the mailbox. It was one sentence in a dead woman's shaking hand. You were chosen, on purpose, in writing. For 13 years, I had built a whole life on the belief that I was the thing you throw away before the good photograph. And it had never been true. Someone had looked at me, really looked, the way nobody in the front of that house ever had, and decided I was the one worth saving. She'd done it quietly, and she'd paid for it with the last strength she had, and she'd trusted me to survive long enough to find out. I reached into the box I'd brought from the bank. I'd carried it in my bag all day, without letting myself take out the one thing I hadn't been able to look at, the photograph. It was old, the colors gone warm and orange, the way film did in the 80s. It was me, maybe 7, on my grandmother's lap, in a lawn chair in the backyard. I could see through her window. She had both arms around me, and she was laughing at something out of frame, and I was holding a dandelion up to the camera like it was treasure, and there's no other way to say it. I was the center of the whole picture. Not scooted to the edge, not half out of it, the middle, lit up, loved, and plainly, and on film. On the back, in a hand still steady in whatever year that was, she'd written, My Winnie, the nicest photo in the house. I sat in her rooms and I held a nice photograph that I was not a stain on, that I was the whole heart of, and I laughed and I cried at the same time, which I did not know a person could do until that evening. And I think that is the closest I have ever come to feeling my grandmother put her arms around me one more time. I want to tell you the rest quickly, because the loud part of the story is over, and the rest is just what a life does after the truth comes out. The title company's fraud report did what those reports do. It was slow, and it was official, and it did not need 1 ounce of vengeance from me. I never had to pick up a phone. In the fall, an investigator from the county called me, and I did the only thing I'd promised myself in that kitchen weeks before. I told the truth, all of it, and I didn't decorate it. My father, who had never once in his life confessed to anything, was, in the end, undone the same way he'd undone me, by a signature. His lawyer negotiated. There was restitution, and there was a plea, and there was at last a public record with his name on it, saying what he'd done, which is the one thing a man like my father cannot survive: the record. He'd spent 40 years making sure the story was always his to tell. Now there was a stamped page that told a different one, and no gentle voice on earth could talk it back into the drawer. I did not send a sheriff. I want you to know that because you were with me in that kitchen for the hour I wanted to. I gave my parents 90 days to leave the house that was mine. 90 days in writing, delivered by a lawyer, with dignity. No garbage bag, no folded shirts on a porch. Whatever they were, I was not going to let them turn me into the last chapter of their own cruelty. My grandmother didn't save the best of this family so it could grow up to fold someone's clothes into plastic. They left in October. I'm told my mother cried. I wasn't there. I'd learned finally that I don't have to watch. Colleen called me in November. Not a text this time. A call, her actual voice, shaking. She didn't make excuses. That was new. She said, "I've been going back through everything, and I think I always knew, and I told myself not to look. And I'm so ashamed, Winnie." And then she said the sentence that no one in the front of that house had ever once said to me. "How are you?" Really. I could have hung up. I thought about it. But my grandmother's letter was in my bag, and there was a line in it I couldn't stop hearing. "Fill this house with people who ask how you are and mean it." So I didn't hang up. I told her the truth, that I didn't know yet, but that I wanted to. She's paying the 95,000 back in pieces to me because it was mine. It's slow. It's honest. It's a start. Her kids call me Aunt Winnie now, and the first time the little one drew me a picture, I put it on the refrigerator that still hums in that kitchen, and I stood there and looked at it for a long time, because I kept the house. I thought about selling it. It would have been easier. But easier has never once been the thing that healed me. So I moved into my grandmother's 2 rooms first. I couldn't take the front of the house all at once. And honestly, I didn't want to, because the back was always where the love lived. I fixed the crack in the back step she'd mentioned in her letter, the one my grandfather never got to. I painted the front rooms a color that was mine, and I changed the locks on the front door, as the owner, the way an owner gets to, but not the back one. Never the back one. Nana's door still wears the same brass lock it has worn for 50 years, and I still carry her key on its red ribbon, and every single afternoon when I come home, I let myself in through her door, the one that always opened for me, and I make tea that is honestly not much better than hers was, and more days than not, there's somebody kind at the table. If any of this landed on you, if you know the particular ache of being written out of a story by the people who were supposed to keep you in it, then do me one small thing before you go. Leave this alike so it finds the next person who's still standing on a porch with a bag in their hands, believing what somebody told them about their own worth. That's the last thing I'll ask of you. You've given me enough just by staying. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 17 or at 30 until a stranger read me 3 numbers off a form. They can take your key, they can change your locks, they can fold your whole life into a bag and set it out with the trash, and stand in a nice photo without you, and tell everyone you were the stain. But somewhere, sometimes, if you're very lucky, one person looks at you when no one's watching and decides, quietly, on purpose, in writing, that you were the best of the whole picture all along. And they leave a door open that no one else can reach. My grandmother left me a door. I finally walked through it, and there is a nice photo on the mantel now, in the house that was always mine, and I am right in the middle of it, holding up a dandelion like its treasure, laughing in a pair of arms that chose me. I was never the stain. I was the one she kept.